Hey, welcome to DC Signal to Noise. I'm John Harris, Jim Wiesmeyer here, and thanks for joining the live broadcast portion of this. We'll get into recording the podcast in just a little bit. What's in the glass to the day, Jim?
I'm sorry. Oh, what's in the glass? Water.
I'm
Water.
so disappointed.
Yeah, I'm going to go to the hard stuff tonight.
Okay, all right. Well, if you've been with us before, you know how this works. So we love hearing feedback from you. So send us comments in the comment section there on Facebook. And we love responding to feedback while the show's going on. We will do that again today. So please do join in on the conversation here. Just a little preview. I think we're going to spend a bit of time today, Jim, talking about what you've been looking at what maybe an increase in split ticket voting and how that may determine the outcome of this election. And your comments on that have really gotten me thinking as well, along with some other analysis I've heard this week. We'll get into that about how not only how that changes the presidential race, but also I think it probably has more impact on the Senate races. And we'll get into that. Yeah. We'll get into that in today's show. Some of the things we're going to talk about. Some of the cash flow issues, still lightning fast payments that we've been hearing about on CFAP and other programs, but still not WIP Plus. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about all the election issues and Nancy Pelosi on Wolf Blitzer and that bizarre moment. So and answer some listener mailbag. So,
and a reader question on cotton. I know we got.
Yeah. So, and again, if there's something in advance you want to make sure that we cover today, drop a note there in the comments. Absolutely. And we'll be sure to talk about it in today's Signal to Noise. So anything last minute to add to the list, Jim?
Nope. Looking at the market, we're up about 250 on the Dow, so it's a good day.
Good day. All right. Well, let's go ahead and start the recording. Here it goes. In 3, 2, 1. It's Friday, time for DC Signal to Noise. I'm John Harris, joined as always by Jim Wiesmeyer from Pro Farmer. Time to split some signal from noise. And Jim, let's start right off with what we've been talking about for several weeks now, and COVID aid and the negotiations, if you can call it that, in Washington. You and I were talking before the show, and so we probably got to bring out that old Monty Python clip of "Bring out your dead, bring out your dead." I'm not dead yet. Well, you will be soon. That's pretty well a good description of where we're at with COVID aid, isn't it?
Yeah, the fat lady is nowhere in the background singing as far as the aid conclusion. They're back to blaming each other, which is a clear signal that most of what you're hearing is noise, okay? I think the biggest problem is the Senate Democrats. The Senate Republicans. They don't want to go along with some of the negotiations that Treasury Secretary Mnuchin has been talking about with the Democrats and Pelosi in particular, House Speaker. And Trump keeps putting his thumb up as far as go more and more. I'll trust Mitch McConnell on this one. He's the majority leader, Republican from Kentucky. If he doesn't say he doesn't have the votes, I'll trust him. He's been a very good vote counter. So I think it's going to be. We'll eventually get it, John, but later rather than sooner. And what the details are, I think we're going to have to wait until after the elections.
Well, yeah, because the mix of the discussion changes after the election, and I think Mitch McConnell's statement that they're looking at only $500 billion, is a pretty clear signal that there's nothing that's going to move before the election. In fact, they're pretty much out of time for that at this point. But it'll be interesting to see how the dynamic changes after the election, and if a lame duck Congress has the incentive to do something at that point.
Yeah, and the $500 billion that includes it excludes, if you will, the $230 billion in additional funding that they still have outstanding under a number of programs. So some of the numbers that the listening and viewing audience may hear may appear to be higher than the $500 billion, but that's why.
But as we've talked about before, while this is very much needed for a lot of people, the urgency for the ag sector isn't necessarily there like it was earlier this year.
No, we've got. I'm not saying the cash flow problems are over for agriculture, but we've had some pretty good, payments coming out. What with the CFAP2 in a dramatic fashion, we've got about $1.7 billion in CRP, Conservation Reserve Program, payments, and we're finally getting the 2019 Crop PLC payments. What I'm looking at some numbers here: 14 cents for corn, Milo 61 cents. Wow.
Hmm.
Things like that. Seed cotton, 6.12 cents. And oats and soybeans did not trigger the payments for the 2019 crop year. But a number of farmers emailed me this week, John, and saying this is part of the problem with the Farm Bill safety net. They're just now getting payments for the 2019 crops.
Right.
And I know it's the formula. I totally understand that. You need to know the marketing year final number from USDA and the Ag Prices Report. But I think this is going to be an issue in the next Farm Bill. I think they'll probably go back to a preliminary, a tentative, payment for the crop to get it closer to the crop year, John.
All right, Jim, I should pause that we do have a celebrity listening in today. Kevin Papp, president of the Minnesota Farm Bureau.
A good friend, too. Hi, Kevin.
Says he's listening in the combine cab. So I hope that yield monitor is looking good for you as you pass through there, Kevin. And pass along any questions. Of course, you probably have more answers than we have questions, Kevin.
Yeah, I'd love to hear the Minnesota outcomes of some key races for the presidency and for Colin Peterson. So if you've got time, text it in.
Yeah, definitely. Particularly that Peterson race that we've been talking about so much here on Signal to Noise. Well, let's get to the presidential race. Several developments this week. Probably most immediately, the dueling town hall meetings last night on ABC and NBC. ABC with Joe Biden, NBC with Donald Trump, on a night that the two were supposed to be meeting head to head in a debate. And I've got to tell you, Jim, I didn't watch them live. In my household, my wife is a Braves fan, so we had the TV
they had
on.
A good night. They had a good night.
Eliminating the Dodgers. Yeah, so that's where my TV was tied up last night. But I went back and watched most of the highlights, and I've got to tell you, I prefer what we ended up with over the debate that we had a couple of weeks ago. I think we got a lot more information out of the dueling town hall events than we would have gotten out of another head-to-head debate. What do you think?
I do too. We actually got some expansion of prior topics that both candidates did not fully respond to. In the case of the Supreme Court packing, issue on Biden, and some sensitive issues from Trump, and he also finally partially answered what he would do in a second term, and we've been waiting for that, John. So, yeah, I just think maybe a different approach on the moderators could be taken. Why does it have to be a network news person? I think it could have been a more balanced because they're not unbiased on the network news. I don't care what anybody says. I don't watch them anymore. But I think if they would have changed a more diplomatic moderator, it would have even been better. But I agree. We finally got some answers. So there were more signals than noise in this one.
Yeah, and I've got to disagree with you a little bit on the moderators. I know you think Savannah Guthrie was probably too aggressive on the Trump side. I don't. I think that there was appropriate pushback on a lot of things that, shall we say, needed to be clarified further, or even the truth brought out on that. There were a couple times she chose some words that I might not necessarily have chosen, but
like crazy uncle.
Those aren't the words I would have chosen. But again, how else do you describe a president of the United States? Again, not just anybody, but the president of the United States retweeting such a crazy conspiracy theory.
You just let the viewer determine that with a not politically striped comment or question. The voter, I give a great respect to the voter to understand the nuances there. I don't like when the moderators become the story in themselves. I mean, that's the old rule. Don't become part of the story. And Stephanopoulos went the other way. He was too passive.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go. I think I would have rather seen George Stephanopoulos push as hard as Savannah Guthrie was. on her side. I would have liked to have seen a lot more of that on the Biden side.
Yes. Well, we just choose to disagree on that, but we'll do it civilly, John.
We will. We will. But again, you note that we did get some key points, some key clarification, although we still don't have full answers. Particularly on the, as you noted, the Supreme Court issue with Joe Biden, but he became more clear than he has been up to that point.
To me, the signal that he gave was they want the vote to occur on Barrett, and he knows what it's going to do.
Right. We all know what it's going to be.
And then he'll use that as a stepping stone for why he wants to do what he will do if he's president and his party controls the Senate. I think they'll use it on that one. At least that's the signal I got from his response. But at least the American public, number one, has a right to know now. I think
yes.
he modified his prior comments on that. And two, we will know before the election, at least those who vote, at the voting booths as opposed to mail-ins.
Yeah, and I think that is important because I think it is an important issue for a lot of people.
Very much.
I know that there are a lot in the leftward wing of that party that very much want to sway the court in that way. But I think there's a lot of people in the middle who think that that it's not proper to adjust the size of the court from where, even though it is allowed for Congress to do, I think there's some hesitance along the political moderates in adjusting that number just because of the games that have been going back and forth since 2016 on the court.
So does that mean the Supreme Court justices that are there now shouldn't consider any case because we're this close to an election?
Well, right, exactly. But my point is, I think the folks in the middle don't want to see us move away from the 9-member Supreme Court.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if it's worked for 150 years or somewhat worked for 150 years, why change? It's equivalent of putting lights in Wrigley Field, the emotion on that one, to use a baseball analogy. We went through fits and starts. Now, it worked out better than what the opponents sought, but boy, if you start flipping however many that they would want to increase it, then you begin it will be politicized. The Supreme Court, it's politicized from that hour on, and I don't think that should happen. And I don't think Biden really wants that as well, to tell you the truth.
Well, and this notion that we know for certain how any Supreme Court justice is going to rule on any given case. I think John Roberts has been a prime example of that. That he has not been the right-wing stalwart that most thought he was going to be coming onto the court. And so, if we find someone that has a good record of jurisprudence, I think that's what you look for, and not take for granted that how they're going to rule on every given case, because each case has its own individual idiosyncrasies that may affect the outcome.
Prior to Trump, Republican presidents more often than not have been surprised in their Supreme Court choices, and we've seen that in current history on that. And I'm not quite sure why that was. Maybe they didn't vet them as well, back then. But I think that they do go through far more litmus tests overtly in the choosing of them, and they have their panels now that they've tested them.
Yeah, but what? I don't know. I get frustrated when we choose anybody, and particularly Supreme Court justices, over a litmus test. I mean, it should be what their judicial temperament is and what their record is of deciding cases and the thought they put into it, and the knowledge they have going into it. It shouldn't be how we think they're going to rule on one specific case.
Well, I only have one litmus test myself. It's the Constitution. And as long as you just don't become an activist, and I think that usually will get you a more conservative justice, and it is the definition of that. But I think too many times in the past, the Democrat choices wanted to change something on an issue that they were not able to get out of Congress or the administration, and I think that's what leads you into some trouble when you look at that basis. The Constitution, and let the debate continue on that one, because we're not going to solve it.
Yeah, indeed. All right, well, while we're talking about political back and forth, let's talk about Nancy Pelosi and her appearance with Wolf Blitzer this week. Jim, that was just weird. There's no other word for it.
Yeah, I actually had to watch CNN several times. It's something I don't like to do because they're not a news program anymore. But Wolf Blitzer brought it back to a news program. He challenged that you don't usually see. And Pelosi made it clear that kind of in extreme frustration, she tried to handle it. She out-trumped Trump in her animosity toward the reporter in this case, or, the questioner. She more than signaled that CNN was a outreach of the Democratic Party. And why are you doing these things, Wolf?
Well, yeah, and it wasn't. He wasn't asking any questions that were out of line. In fact, he was asking some questions we've asked on this program over the last couple of weeks, which is if people so desperately need a coronavirus aid package, and everyone agrees at least on some of the direct payments, why not move those forward? And she got very combative on that, and saying that she knows better than the media about what the people really need and really want. And I just thought it was a strange back and forth.
Yeah, you get emotional when there's more than a kernel of truth in what you're hearing, and that's what I think occurred. And two, she was surprised because the Democrats are not used to almost at all of fielding significant questions when they go on CNN, MSNBC, the network news. They're just not used to it, and she saw it as an attack. And she got really vicious, and that was more than interesting to see.
But again, the question still remains: if people need this money and everyone agrees on that portion of it, why not put it out? Why are we holding out for the entire 2.2 trillion?
Totally agree. I mean, you've got CEOs of corporations, Walmart and others, going on the cable news program saying, don't say a targeted bill is not needed, because there's still lingering pain out there. So, absolutely. It feeds into the conjecture, John, that Pelosi does not want any sense of a victory or more aid prior to the election. I'm not saying that's totally true, but you certainly hear that in conjecture in this town.
Yeah, well, and again, I don't see how, and we've talked about this ad nauseum, but I don't see how either side has a win in not getting something through. It boggles my mind. And I think there's eventually going to be a political price to pay for both sides and how this is played out up until the election. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. Again, a reminder, if you're listening to the podcast at 2:00 Eastern every Friday afternoon, we actually stream this live. We're live now on the AgriTalk Facebook page. So if you're just listening to the podcast now and want to be part of the live broadcast, be sure at 2:00 Friday afternoons you would join us at the AgriTalk Facebook page. If you're on one of the Facebook pages now listening in, be sure to send us your question in the chat. We'd love to chew over what's on your mind today. And Jim, let's chew over what's on your mind. You've been thinking a lot about split ticket voting. What have you been thinking about?
Well, most of the election year gurus, Charlie Cook and others are saying, split ticketing is in the past. They've cited data where increasingly so voters vote straight tickets. Now, that may well be again, but in the calls I've made to both in the rural sector and elsewhere, I'm starting to pick up the opposite. So if they think Biden's going to win the presidency, they want the checks and balances. So if that's the case, I'm thinking we could return to the split voting days for checks and balances purposes, because I do think the majority of Americans don't want an across-the-board trifecta of one party whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans controlling the White House, House, and Senate. History shows that that's when a party gets what they really want the first 2 years, and they'll typically overreach. And then in the midterm elections, and you have the balance back.
Themselves.
Yes. So if that's the case, if my hunch, and it's only a hunch, if it's correct, then whoever wins a particular state, the opposite party could win some very close Senate elections. So I think we could see some surprises, John, in on election night relative to the downstate elections.
I'll get back to that in just a second, but real quickly, Wendy checking in on the last conversation because Nancy makes an unreasonable request with the bailout package. Agreed. I would also agree that Mitch McConnell is being unreasonable in his response at $500 billion, which puts the White House in the position of being reasonable.
However, McConnell, as majority leader, knows that the majority of his Republicans in the Senate will only go so far. So it looks to me like Trump and Mnuchin are not echoing what the majority of Senate Republicans are saying, and that's part of the stalemate, John. Trump is not a conservative. He spends money, like the Democrats do. But McConnell, and all of a sudden, I will admit, all of a sudden, more than a few Republican senators are worried about the spending levels here, the deficits and the debt. Well, it is what it is. He's got to have the votes because he doesn't want to be totally embarrassed for his chamber if they don't have the majority of Republicans voting for whatever package eventually comes out, John. I think that's all sides there. Pelosi wants whatever, 2.2 trillion, I think now. Right. The last offer from Mnuchin was 1.8 trillion, and I do think it's going to go up, but there's no way that, the majority of Democrats, of course, would pass it in the Senate. But again, you'd have a lopsided Democratic vote in the Senate for the package. And I'm telling you, McConnell wouldn't bring that to the floor. He just wouldn't.
No, he wouldn't. So in effect, McConnell and the Senate Republicans are saying no. I mean, that yes. 500 billion figure is a no.
I agree. Yeah. And which was why there should have been a targeted approach early on, which we began this conversation with. There is agreement on the need for stimulus payments. $1,200. There is agreement. They may quarrel about how long under the unemployment benefit. There is agreement on a certain package for the PPP program again, but there are differences relative to the level of funding for individual states. And there is disagreement on the Senate pushed, McConnell pushed liability protection, John. But they're closer to some of these issues. But the price tag is the biggest bugaboo.
And a couple more messages coming in. Judith saying the only way we can end the crippling deadlock is to restore a more centrist down ticket. We'll get back to that here in just a second, Jim. Although I don't know that there are many centrists running anymore, and we'll discuss that.
Well, I want to jump in here with I'm on a cause here, John. I think every state should listen to me, my signal of putting on every ballot none of the below. I won't even say none of the above, because I want that the first choice in any representative or Senate or presidential race, none of the below. And if that particular slot won in an election, then you choose new candidates from both political parties. I think this would be a much better country.
Hear, 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 hear.
And they'd be scared to death of that, because there'd have to be accountability that both candidates could be thrown out. And that's how you would get centrists from both sides. There are moderate Democrats, not as many anymore, but there are moderate, or let's say less far left, out there. And I think we're eventually going to get there, because both parties are overreaching right now, both parties.
But we're not going to get it until we fix the districting problem. We've let the candidates pick their own districts, which, surprise to them, they found out then that they had attacks from the further margins that knocked them out of office, rather than from the other parties, and that's just served to push us further and further and further out to the
True.
margin. Until we
True.
fix that, we're not going to have centrist candidates anymore.
Yeah, what you just said, their biggest competitor was being primaried from someone from their own party. And if you're liberal, if they weren't too liberal, then they were voted out in the primaries. Right. And the same thing on the conservative side. You had to be to the right of Attila the Hun in order to get certain counties elected. Yes, that's a distinct problem. Yes, although I also, when I first came to town many years ago in the mid-70s, I never believed in term limits. Now I do, because I think this plays into it as well. I like fresh, I don't care how old they are, but I like new people coming in and out. And yes, I respect experience, but I think more often than not, you shouldn't be a career politician. You ought to go back to the history of our country, where they had to go back in many cases to the farm and the rural sectors to make a payroll.
But I disagree with you. I don't care about age. I think we need to see more millennials in office. I'm a Gen Xer myself, but I would like to see. No, seriously, I think there's not enough voice for the millennials, which are a huge percentage of the electorate in the U.S., but they're not being heard in public office as of this point, and I think they need to be.
I need to see proof. I need to see proof. Once they graduate from college at great expense to their parents or grandparents, and they get a job, then of course they can run, because I think they'll be more realistic.
No, millennials are out of college now and in the workforce and out there, and a big part of society, and I think they're underrepresented in the elected class right now, and I think we should see more of them.
I can be convinced.
All right, Wendy checking in. Government money comes from hardworking Americans. They will break our backs by raising our taxes. This is why checks and balances. We couldn't agree more. We talk about it all the time, that we don't talk about it being government money. We talk about it being taxpayer money. It is everything. From including CFAP, and everything is generated by taxpayers, and there is a cost to that. Well, generated by taxpayers or generated by borrowing money that taxpayers are going to have to pay even more for down the road.
Yeah, a frequent email question I get from farmers and ranchers is, how long can these income transfer payments continue, what with our deficits and debt? And I respond by saying, well, for the next Congress, the next 2 years, I don't see a push to cut spending. But after that, watch out. That I think every major area in government is going to have to be taken a look at, because look at the bond markets right now. They're just beginning to signal not sky high inflation, but increased inflation. And boy, our current debt situation would heave, John, if we start whenever we start having higher interest rates, because the cost to fund our tremendous, debt will continue to be a problem. So, Now, in the case of taxes and the presidency, Trump wants to further cut the taxes, which on the surface is always good, but then there's the lack of revenue. Biden wants to increase the taxes on wealthy people that they defined 400,000 or above, and he wants to significantly increase the tax on corporations and a huge, big increase in capital gains taxes. But that's to fund the $1 trillion type programs that he has. So at least it won't add to the deficit and debt in that regard. So that's why I think the next few years it's going to be the status quo regarding any effort to reduce spending on types of programs.
Well, and let's touch on that for a little bit, because there are two things in particular there that have a dramatic impact on farming operations, and let's start first with the estate tax. As you noted, Joe Biden wants to bring back at least a portion of the estate tax. What does he want to see? And that's certainly one that would have a direct impact on passing farm operations down from generation to generation.
Especially the basis changes that you would see if some of these proposals come into play.
Well, I want to get to that next.
Yeah, we're talking big potential impacts here. Now, again, the other side will say, really the estate tax at the levels they have for the exemptions really don't impact that many people. So there's your balance right there.
Yeah, and we don't know exactly what the exemptions would be under a Biden proposal, and so how many farms that would impact. But as you note, the loss of stepped-up basis would impact a great number of people. And I think most of our audience knows what this means and what the implication is. But now if if a family member dies and those assets are passed down, the basis price for that asset is stepped up to what the value is at the time of death. And so you have a much less, or could have a much less tax implication there. And that could be lost, or at least partially lost, under a Biden administration.
Basically, it would be a capital gains tax.
Yeah, which again could be a very significant hit in the passing of a farming operation or in other assets if there is not an exemption level included in that.
Yeah, it would break up some big operations as we know them right now, and because we've seen that before, where say two brothers operated on a rather large operation, one just had to totally get out because they just couldn't deal with it. I've seen that. I've seen that in cases.
So those are a couple of very, very important things for those in agriculture to watch in this election discussion.
But those are good questions, good comments. Good comments.
Yes, they are. Thanks for those. And again, as we go on, if you have more questions or comments, send them into the comment section there on Facebook. Let's get back to this notion, though, of split ticket voting. So you said that you talked about this desire from the electorate at large to have a balance in government, if you will. So does that mean we could see Donald Trump lose Iowa, but Joni Ernst win?
Could, yes. Iowa has a little history of the Democrats in the polls going into election. Looks like they were going to win. You saw that in the last governor's race there. And Reynolds came out and won it. So I think Iowa has a history of not being surprised under certain of the races, but that could fall into play in Iowa. But I know in the debate between Senator Ernst and Teresa Greenfield, there was a key question raised during their debate about the break-even of soybeans. Now, I don't think one issue ever settles a campaign, but let's just say Senator Ernst did not know the break-even price for soybeans, and Teresa Greenfield is making hay out of that one.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if that does have an impact in that race, or also the ongoing battle over ethanol waivers has an impact in that race as well. But your discussion of this, Jim, and some other things I've heard this week have me rethinking the likelihood of the Democrats taking control of the Senate. Because if that is the case, if the electorate thinks that this is baked in, that Joe Biden is going to win the White House, do they then start voting for Republican candidates down the ballot to provide that offset? And you mix that with, if you look at the Senate map, there are probably three races that are not completely in the bag, but at least easy to see Democrats taking. That'd be Colorado, North Carolina, and Arizona. It looks like more than likely Democrats are going to take those three seats. But once you get past those three, it gets a little more difficult. You've got that race in Iowa. There's a couple others.
Lindsey Graham, South Carolina is right. They're too close to call right now, and that's a surprise in and of itself.
But Lindsey Graham's seen a little momentum here at the tail end of that.
Yes,
there's been some polling that shows him a little momentum. So I think that it's not impossible, but I think it's less likely at this point than it seemed even a week or so ago.
And on the Republican side, Michigan is far more of a battle than what most of the prognosticators have been saying on the Republican side. At least a chance to dethrone Peters. So I'd watch that one on election night. There's another adage that a lot of these election year experts say, and on the one side I believe it, but it wouldn't be consistent with my other theory, John, but that's never stopped me from being, saying things, being inconsistent. But it's usually a rule of thumb is a president, whoever wins the presidency will also win the Senate. I mean, you'll hear Charlie Cook and other people say that because of the momentum. And there are numbers to back up in close elections. It tends to favor one party over the other, the momentum on that. So these are the cross currents. That's why this is a murky area. It's more art than science, and so these are the things that make watching the elections on election night or week or month, so interesting to people like me and you and others.
Yeah, and on the House side, it looks hugely unlikely that the Republicans would take control there. But we may see a little bit of a shift there. I mean, we've talked about the Peterson race. There are some other races in there that could be interesting to watch.
Yes, but here's where I go on just a very good friend of mine is David Wasserman of the Cook Political Report. He's the House editor. And let me just tell you, he does number crunching and footwork and interviews the candidates. He could name, he's unbelievable. He could name every current occupant of the House and their challenger. And I've seen him try to be stumped. He does his research, and he's seeing a pickup of seats by the Democrats in the House. So until proven otherwise, I'm going to bow to my friend because number one, I know him, and number two, I know his discipline in
and we know he knows research. A whole lot more than us.
Yeah. So I'll bow to that. Now he says and I'll be with him early next week at the Greenbrier in West Virginia. I'm driving there. And he's on Tuesday. So I know he will be specifically asked about the Peterson race in the 7th district in Minnesota. And with me in the audience, because we're personal friends, he calls me Wieselmeyer and I call him Waffleman. So he knows I'll yell out in the audience if he says a toss-up. I want him to make a prediction. Will Peterson get reelected or will he lose? So we'll see.
All right,
stay tuned Tuesday.
Take your recorder, see if he'll talk to us a little bit.
I will. I'm going to try. He's a popular guy there, but if I can get him to the side when we're having our networking drinks, I'll get him.
Oh yeah, doing a couple drinks in. You get the good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
You Minnesota people, write in. Because the last few weeks we've had pretty good feedback that a number of you confirmed that in more cases than not, Democrats charge for their campaign signs. Republicans do not. Another person wrote in wanting to ask us, what about cotton in China? Do you want to get into that yet or not?
Yeah, let's go ahead and get into that. Says you hear a lot about corn, soybeans, and other commodities. In Jim's opinion, will the China trade deal benefit and support cotton prices in the U.S. long term? Need to bring textile mills back to the U.S. Several big textile mills and other such businesses in our local town and state are empty when they moved out of the country.
Yes, and that's been a shame in that, because I remember when it started with the fertilizer sector that we got out of this country, and then we got into problems in the availability and the price of fertilizer. So definitely, had it not been for the cooperatives and the mills in the cotton industry wanting to keep their industry as much intact as they can, we would have seen the loss of many textile. So to answer the question, I think China is already having an impact on the upside for China. How long that will remain is murky. And I hate to say those things because we need to know, will we have phase 2 or how China will react after the elections? But China has shown if they need the product, they'll buy it. I think short term, you also had a situation just yesterday, Reuters reported that their sources are saying China is telling their cotton buyers not to buy from Australia cotton. And so that's a potential short-term plus here. So I think we're going into more of a demand pull market in the case of cotton. And whenever you have demand pull markets, that's good news for the price appreciation. And I would add, I like good news. I don't like to say bad news when it comes to prices. Look at just this week. We've got corn futures topping $4 for the first time in a year. Soft red SRW wheat futures hit their highest since August the 2014. and December hogs posted the new highs for the year. I mean, so we finally got some things turned around, and that goes into supplementing our cash flow situation topic that we talked about at the onset of the program, John.
Yeah, and I want to circle back to that in just a second. But on the cotton question, I think one other kind of unanticipated impact of the current trade situation is those tariffs are building demand for domestic textile industry that doesn't exist. I mean, I've got a friend who has a business that they sell a lot of different products into base exchanges around the world, and they are trying to find a way to avoid buying textile products out of China, and just are having troubles finding U.S. suppliers for that. So I think there is a growing demand out of there that has grown out of those Chinese tariffs.
Good point. You mean to diversify their supply?
To diversify their supply and find a U.S. supplier where they don't have to pay that 25% tariff on it.
Absolutely. Right on. So what we're saying is there's some constructive, short-term and likely potential long-term, developments for our good cotton industry, and I'll go for that any day.
Yeah, we just need the textile industry to start building back up. They need to see enough security in business here domestically to build back up, because it is, as the writer noted, very limited in the U.S. right now because of that earlier collapse.
Well, and you see it in the cooperatives when they team together. You see that in the rice millers. I speak to rice growers on an annual basis, and they just had a confirmed sale, if not shipment, to China. Not a lot, but boy, that's a step in the right direction on the demand side for good old U.S. rice.
Yeah. Let's get back to that cash flow issue, because we have been hearing more about continued lightning quick payments on CFAP2 and other programs. USDA has really had its act together in getting that program implemented.
$4.5 billion already total for CFAP2. Now, I know some people, you included, have asked me, will that have any election year impacts? Well, it gets into attitude, your feelings on that. So I think in an indirect way, yes. I mean, number one, it should get people to the voting booth. If you don't vote, as we have a page 4 special in Pro Farmer this week on elections, I had to boil it down in 850 words, by the way. But we headlined it, elections, if you don't vote, you can't complain about the results. So once again, either mail in your votes or vote. But to answer your question, yeah, USDA, I will applaud them for getting out $4.5 billion already under CFAP2. At the same time, they're pumping out almost $1.7 billion for Conservation Reserve Program payments. And boy, that's a lot of cash flow, let alone we're at a little over $10.2 billion for CFAP1 payments, John.
Yeah, and President Trump very obviously hopes it has an impact on the vote. He brought it up at his appearance in Des Moines this week, reminding those there that saying that the taxpayers have sent $28 billion out to across American farmland this year, and brought that up as a point in his campaign rally.
Yes, and another question we got from a Signal to Noise viewer a while back is, what about compliance checks on CFAP1? Yeah. And state and county FSA offices put out a notice just yesterday that they're working with the National Agricultural Statistics Service to, quote, randomly identify a statistically sound number of CFAP applications for review. Now, a state or county FSA office can always add applications to that list if they think an individual operator should be reviewed. But we're starting to see compliance check details, right now, and that's well and good that there should be, spot checks out there, because this is a lot of money.
All right, and while CFAP2 payments have been going very well, CRP payments, ARC PLC, a lot of great progress, quick progress on that. Still seeing delays in WIP Plus, and you've been hearing increasing pressure about that in DC.
Oh, this program started to talking about it through our listeners, and this is why it gives me goosebumps because grassroots is so important. We not only got a USDA official response that stay tuned, and then this week we got the announcement of a deadline of October 30th, but they still didn't put out details on the quality losses from 2018 and 2019 authorized natural disasters. Who do they think they are? The World Trade Organization? Waiting so long.
Or do you know EPA?
Senator John Tester, you talk about getting testy on it. He lambasted them for taking as long as they have on this particular program. And Senator Hoeven last week that we mentioned is also calling in because he really pushed this WHIP Plus program. And usually when Senator Hoeven calls into the White House and USDA on an issue, he gets response. But this was growing farmer animosity toward the way this program was being implemented, and I think it'll have carry through for the new farm bill whenever we get it, because I don't know whether they'll call it the same, but they're going to change. I think there will be one in the next farm bill, but it's going to be hopefully far better, operated through language in the new farm bill. So I think this has some staying power as an issue, John.
Yeah, and I want to underscore something you said. It was you folks listening right now. You're the ones who have brought this to the forefront because of the notes that you've sent us. It has brought about action in Washington directly. Yes. It has brought the attention of Senator Hoeven. It has brought the attention of Senator Tester, and they aren't letting go of this. So hats off to both of those senators, and thank you to you folks who have written us about this and brought it to the forefront. You're the ones that have really prompted action on this, so thank you. Real quick, and again, thanks to Wendy and Johnny who are checking in. I appreciate the comments, and again, being able to have this immediate interaction and answer questions in real time, Jim, has brought the show to a whole level of enjoyment for you and me.
I really love it. Yeah, it just gives you instant feedback and balance in certain cases. So we make sure that we want to present as many sides as we possibly should. 2020 WHIP Plus. I just saw that come in. I think I'm very confident that there will be a 2020 crop WHIP. Why? We have the derecho. That'll get farm state lawmakers really pushing for a WHIP Plus. But of course, you have the southern disasters that we had with the hurricanes, etc. And once you get a regional mix like that, I'll guarantee you almost a focus on that.
Yes, indeed. All right, well, let's wrap up with a somewhat positive note here, Jim. And the Rural Main Street Index came out this week, and for the first time in quite a long time, it was net positive. The index is 0 to 150 being neutral. It was at 53.2 this week. So there is now finally a slightly positive outlook in rural America. Some more concerns about restaurants and small businesses, but not a whole lot of concern expressed in there about farming operations at this point.
Well, let's connect the dots that I think we've already mentioned. Not only have we seen a rally in the futures prices for corn, soybeans, wheat, and hogs, they likely have been, I don't think it's a 1-for-1 relative to cash prices, but I know cash prices have gone up. I haven't looked at basis charts lately. But you also have a greater number of certainty regarding the payment situation. Now they know the ARC payment rates for the 2019 crop. They know what the CRP payments, and usually they take longer to announce those CRP payments. And so that's a very good sign. So, and it's just not government payments. It's the free market talking as well with this fledgling demand pull market. in a number of them. And if that doesn't pick up a farmer and producer's mood, I don't know what will. So I think there's a very good justification for a pickup in the attitudes. And you're seeing that also in the overall consumer confidence, levels, because some of the uncertainties is starting to be lifted relative to pharmaceuticals on COVID-19 that appear to be working. You have at least one, if not several firms saying that they'll go for emergency authorization for a vaccine by the end of November. And that's an attitudinal shift that will solve not everybody, because surveys show 1/3 of Americans will be very cautious about taking a vaccine, at least initially. But all that together, John, it gives you more certainty. Coupled with the demand for products, sorghum, cotton, rice, corn. We've listed them. I was not surprised by that survey number for the uptick in attitudes on the part of agriculture.
Yeah, and I think that survey was conducted, if not completely, at least largely before we saw the uptick in corn and soybean prices. Corn above $4, beans above 10, and so certainly I would expect next month to see that rise even further.
Yeah, I know in corn and beans, I talked to Brian Grady. Every time I go out to give a speech, whether it's in person or on a webinar, I always check on prices.
Yeah.
And I asked him on corn and soybeans, and he said at the time, he said December corn 4 to 420. To get beyond 420 on the December futures, it takes new bullish news. Now, that doesn't mean we won't get it, but it takes new bullish news. And in the case of November soybeans, the 1080 level, there's big resistance at that 1080 level. And if we can exceed that, and there's your plug there, if there's open air until $12 for soybeans, and that's that's what technical traders are going to look at. So it's a hurdle right now, that 1080 figure, but at least it's plausible right now on the 1080, where just a month or so ago most people wouldn't have said that.
Well, but the bigger key is both those numbers are, for most people, profitable.
For most people, we've learned to say everybody has a difference, but it depends on your cost, on break-even cost. And I hope Senator Ernst is listening to this. On average gets you in trouble. It's just a little over $10 on soybeans on average. But I remember my uncles telling me a long time ago, their cost of production was lower than the average person because they were persnickety on cost. So it depends who you're talking to and with.
Indeed. All right. Well, Jim, as we end it every week, where are you watching for signal this week?
Well, I'm going to a crop insurance agent CEPA meeting, and I always love those people because you talk about at the state level, they've got the pulse out there. The crop insurance industry is great, whether it's CURB or CEPA, because they talk to so many producers, John. So I'm looking really forward to that. In the upcoming things here in Washington on October 22nd, we'll get the panel, the Judiciary panel in the Senate voting on Amy Coney Barrett. She will be approved, and then they'll set a date for confirmation in the Senate. We still need that from McConnell, and we always will continue to look at China's purchases of U.S. farm products, which continued this week, both on a daily basis and on a weekly basis. And of course, the election. Any other surprises that we may see on that one?
Can we take any more at this point?
No, we can't. Let's get it over with. Let's get it over with.
Indeed. Well, what is it now? Some 20 million people have?
Yes. That's why it's probably baked in. It's probably baked in. But there are a few. I think that most of the people who watch the town halls, if there were some undecided, I think that they wanted another reason to vote for who they really wanted to, but had not seen enough to get them to that level yet. So that's why I think these things could be more important than some people think, that it gives confidence into a person who's voting for a particular person.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I heard you make that observation on AgriTalk this morning, and I wanted to bring it up that you're right. There probably are a lot of people that are leaning one direction but aren't happy with the choice where they're leaning and just looking for that last excuse to say, okay, I can go place my vote.
And to just see him in action again. Now, it's a very sensitive area, but the cognitiveness of Senator former Vice President Biden is a cause for concern among many potential voters. And the more they see him respond to questions without major gaffes, is the more they'll better feel that he can withstand the pressures of the office of the presidency. In the case of President Trump, if their inclination is to vote for him, but yet through his prior actions that say, oh my goodness, I just can't do this. If he shows a little more stability, being presidential, that may be enough to convince more than a few to say, okay, that's all I need. I'm going to vote.
Which is where I think his campaign is trying to push him, and he's pushing back so far.
It's Trump. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
Trump. It's
it
Trump.
is.
But he's the known commodity. On the part of what's so important in this election is not only who wins the presidency, but who controls Congress. And again, if you have a trifecta, either political party, you're going to see substantial changes. And we were asked, what would that be for agriculture? Well, the Democratic Party, there's no right or wrong on this. They tend to favor the smaller to middle producer as far as size, and that they'll tend to look at payment caps and want to reduce them, the total amount of farm program payments you can get. They tend to significantly favor food and nutrition programs, and the party tends to like regulations as opposed to the deregulation spirit on the part of Republicans. I do think both parties, this town in the meat sector, both parties are telling me they want to look at worker requirements in the case of meatpacking plants, and also take a look at potential, I'm not saying there are, potential antitrust issues in the meatpacking, in the meat industry. I'm hearing that from both sides. So I think we're going to have a focus on the meat industry no matter who wins.
I agree 100%. Well, Jim, thank you so much for bringing us up to date this week. Again, a reminder, if you want to be a part of the broadcast next week, join us at 2 p.m. Eastern on the AgriTalk Facebook page and shout your questions at us. Or if you don't want to wait that long, just send us an email at signaltonoise@farmjournal.com, and we'll discuss your question or comment on next week's show. Thanks, Jim.
Anytime.
All right, thanks for joining us this week on DC Signal to Noise.